We learned in early 2018 that this opportunity zone idea had been packaged into the tax legislation that was passed at the very end of 2017. And as we started looking through that information, we realized that each state was going to have a significant role on the early end of trying to establish which of the 25% of the eligible census tracts were going to be named as opportunity zones. So we had to go through a pretty intense process of trying to come up with as much objective measures as we could to try to determine which one of the zones made sense to be nominated to the Department of Treasury as an eligible opportunity zone. So we had those objective measures that we came up with, and we also had to take into consideration that we needed to keep in mind that we needed a reasonably good geographic distribution of those that we nominated, as well as a distribution between those that are rural and then those that are urban, realizing that there are both areas in urban and rural areas that need investment. So basically this program is designed to stimulate investors to invest in underserved areas. And so we tried to take all that into consideration when we nominated those census tracts. So there's 85 in the state of Arkansas that are opportunity zones, and there's several areas that didn't get an opportunity zone. And my response to that is, to those areas that did get an opportunity zone, great. It's another tool in your tool belt, but it is not the only thing that's out there. The big value of opportunity zones is when you use it, the benefits of those, and you can stack them together with other kinds of incentives to make the return on investment for investors feel right for them and eligible for their investment. They're all looking for their return. So to those that don't have an opportunity zone in your area, it's not the end of the world. You may not have this one particular tool to use in your area, but there are a variety of other incentives and programs and tax credits that are available for various projects. So what we consider our role to be at this point is, after we've nominated them, they got approved by the Secretary of Treasury, and now those census tracts are set. We get a lot of questions about amending it or moving it or changing it. We can't do that now. It's set, it's done, and that's the way it's going to be. Our role now is going to be to assist those local areas in how do we make use of those that we have. And what Mike is going to say in the slides that he has goes into good detail about what the things I've been saying at a much higher level for some time now is figuring out how to leverage the fact that you do have an opportunity zone in your area and that you can now make the most use of that opportunity zone. And how do you make the most use of that zone? What information do you need? How do you market it? And our role at this point is we're trying to come up with the capability of being able to support, complement those efforts at the local level in order that those projects that might be coming to those areas have the best opportunity to attract that investment, because that's what we're all trying to do here, is attract investment to the area that creates and maintains well-paying jobs. So I'm interested in both what Mike has to say and then what Chris and Adam are going to tell you are the details of how those companies and how those businesses will qualify and what's necessary and what they have to keep in mind in trying to figure out, can we use this very advantageous tool to help us make this decision. Now, I'm going to sit back and listen, because the other three folks on this panel have much, much more important things to say in this current situation as we are right now. Thank you.
All right. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Jimmy Kimmel once joked that April 15th, tax day, is the day that ordinary Americans send all their money to Washington, D.C., while wealthy Americans send their money to the Cayman Islands. I'm not sure how true that is, but what we're basically talking about here is how this Opportunity Zone program can help steer more of that wealth and capital here to Arkansas and not the Cayman Islands. So Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, he said in the beginning of this program, and he's repeated it, that this program, he predicts that it will send over $100 billion in private capital invested into opportunity zones. And what he means there is this whole program kind of started after the GFC, the global financial crisis in 2008. Since then, the stock market has gone up, but lower income communities have kind of lagged behind. So there's a lot of private capital just locked in the stock market. So the idea is to shift that capital over into lower income communities with a tax incentive. What are opportunity zones? Brian kind of talked about the process of Arkansas getting their opportunity zone tracts designated. I'm going to talk about some of the tax benefits, and I'm just going to briefly touch on them because this area is dense and complex, and if we really wanted to get into the details, which I'm more than happy to do and talk nerdy tax talk, but we'd be here all day and all day tomorrow, and I know you guys are looking forward to lunch. So let's see. And then Chris will get into some of those, how the details work with actual funds. And then Mike's going to go over the 6 Ps of promotion for how your cities can actually use this. So, the Opportunity Zone program was created with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in December 2017. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was huge, and this Opportunity Zone program was about 6 pages of tax code, 1400Z-1 and 1400Z-2. So those tax rules were created December 31st, 2017, and then there was a gap. The rules came out, they looked good, they talked about the benefits and the incentives, but we didn't really know no one knew how they would work. So the Treasury came out with proposed regulations, a first set of proposed regulations in October of 2018, and they provided some guidance. Investors were making some investments based on those regulations, but they're really geared more towards real estate investments. So we had clients, trying to set up funds, and our interpretation of those regs was that it was mainly geared towards real estate. But then last month, 2 months ago, April 17th, 2019, the Treasury came out with a second set of proposed regs, about 160 pages, which really offered a lot of good guidance to businesses. A lot of investors who were kind of waiting on the sidelines, they really started to ramp up activity. We've seen just a big flurry of activity since then, and it's still going, and it's just growing and growing and growing. As far as new tax rules in the tax world, this program is pretty exciting, and it seems like a new tax incentive, federal tax incentive will come out every year, but this one seems a little different. I just wanted to go over some of the terminology. As you're going through these rules, it's almost like learning a new language, and we're going to be using some terms interchangeably. QOZ, or zone, just refers to a qualified opportunity zone, and that's just the census tracts. And you got to remember, when Arkansas's opportunity zones were created, Brian was really hamstrung on, he could only designate the census tracts that were already in existence in 2015. So there was no line drawing. He just had, if there was a tract, then he could designate that or nominate that for designation, and then the Treasury Secretary could approve it. And on May 18th, 2018, the Department of Treasury did. I think there was only one that was rejected, right? Okay, QOF, or fund, that just refers to the Qualified Opportunity Fund. And a fund, they use the word fund, but it's really just an entity. It's either an LLC or a corporation that can self-certify as a fund with using a form that the IRS came out with. QOZB, that just refers to a Qualified Opportunity Zone business. Chris is going to get into that more. There's QOF and a QOZB there are a lot of important distinguishments between those two. And then QOZBP is Qualified Opportunity Zone business property, which Chris will also get into. So what are the tax benefits? Why is everyone excited about this? Well, there's 3 main tax benefits for investors looking to get involved in qualified opportunity zones. The first one is an initial deferral of tax. So the way I look at it as old gain versus new gain. You have to, in order to take advantage of this, an investor has to have existing capital gain. Not everyone out there just has capital gains sitting around or the potential to generate capital gains. So that kind of lops off a certain segment of the Americans who are looking to take advantage of this. And I think Mike or Chris are going to get into the numbers of what's practical and what's not. So an investor takes capital gain that he will otherwise pay tax on and can roll it over into a qualified fund and gets a deferral on the payment of tax on that capital that's rolled over into the fund. So that it's kind of like a 1031, except it's a little more. There's a lot more breathing room with this type of rollover versus a 1031. So anyway, the taxpayer rolls over that capital gain into a fund, gets a deferred tax, but only up until 2026. And at 2026, all investors who invested in qualified opportunity funds will have to pay tax on that original capital gain that was rolled over. But in 2026, the taxpayers or the investors, they can get a credit of up to 10 or 15%, and that's the next benefit. There's a little reduction of tax. So if an investor invests day one, holds on to that investment, gets the deferral of tax, and then sells a day after year 5 of making the investment, he or she will get a 10% reduction on the payment of tax on that initial investment. So that's good. And then after 7 years, we'll get a total of a 15% reduction. So it's not 10 plus 15, it's the 10 plus 5. So after 7 years, we'll get an extra 5, totaling 15%. So that's good too. But number 3 is really the big prize. This is what investors are really going after. This is the big carrot. After 10 years, so say an investor, say there's a cashier at Walmart who has 1 share of Walmart stock that, or let's say 100 shares, got it for $0 and now it's worth $1 million. And he takes that capital gain, rolls it over into a fund, gets the initial deferral, and then gets the reduction on the after 5 years and 7 years. But his investment after 10 years has grown to $10 million. He or she can exclude that new gain, that new appreciation on the new investment, 100%. So that's the big prize. But it only really works. This big new gain exclusion is how I think of it. The old gain is the initial deferral, and then the new gain is the new appreciation. That big incentive is only there if the investment makes money. So if an investor invests into a project that doesn't make money after 10 years, there's that tax benefit just isn't there. So that means that investors are really going to be looking for projects that have potential to grow. So this slide just kind of goes over a typical opportunity zone structure. So you have your investors on the left. Investors A, B, and C, they have initial capital gain that they're looking to invest. So instead of paying tax on that capital gain, they can go ahead and find a fund or set up a fund themselves and invest that capital gain into the fund. And then that fund will need to go ahead and start investing in projects. And there are a lot of timing issues here. A lot of the funds will need to have all their ducks in a row before they accept capital from the investors. So Mike's going to get into some of these details, but the fund will need to just go ahead and start doing these projects quickly. The new regulations also provide, and this was a big issue before April, how many, is it just going to be one project that a fund can do, or what if a fund, finishes a project at year 3? Can the fund manager sell that project or sell that development and reinvest? Well, yes, now you can. The new regulations specifically say yes, that fund can finish a project, sell it, reinvest it, and then those proceeds will still qualify for the 10-year exclusion. So the ideal, some of the models I've seen are that funds are going to look for 3 or 4 cycles of the initial investment. So they're looking at 3, 4 projects within that 10-year period, using that capital. They're looking at multiple projects, but so that's basically how it works. And then on the next slide, just kind of go over some of the important dates. December 31st, 2019, that's an important one. That's so in order to get the 5-year and 7-year and 10-year tax benefits, investors will need to invest their capital into a fund by the end of this year. And that's just because of the 7-year incentive. By 2026 is when all investors will need to recognize the capital gains tax on the initial capital investment. So 7 years minus December 31st, 2026 is December 31st, 2019. So if an investor invests capital before the end of this year, he or she will be eligible for that 7-year, 15% tax benefit and the 5-year and the potential exclusion after 7 years. If the investor invests, January 1st, 2020, he or she can still get the 5-year 10% reduction and the 10-year exclusion after holding onto it for 10 years. So you're still going to see investment, but for those who want to take advantage of the entire thing, they're going to need to invest before the end of this year. And 2047, December 31st, 2047, that's the end date of this program. This whole program has a limited shelf life. That's the end date right now. If there has been talk that date will go away at some point, but in my opinion, I don't think that's going to happen. The new regulations also created a general anti-abuse rule. Basically, it says if you abuse this program, and your project doesn't comply with the intent and the purpose of this program, then the IRS can just go ahead and unravel it all and tax the whole thing, and investors will not be happy. So that's a big deterrent. So really, investors they're going to want to stay in the middle of the fairway, and that means for you all that they are actually going to need to improve low-income areas and use their capital to improve projects. The new regulations actually include a definition of what the purpose of this program is, and that's at the bottom of this slide. The purpose of this program seeks to encourage economic growth and investment in designated distressed communities, which are qualified opportunity zones, by providing federal income tax benefits to taxpayers who invest new capital in businesses located within qualified opportunity zones through a qualified opportunity fund. There are a lot of, technical rules there, but that's the overall purpose that investors are going to have to really follow. And there are a lot of other new rules in the regulations, but we just don't have the time to get into them. Chris is going to talk about some of these, and then after Chris talks, Mike's going to talk about how your cities can benefit from this and what they can do now to help attract some investment and development.
Is this on? Whew, that was a whole lot. So, who in here has a city that has an opportunity zone in it? Okay, great. So, I'm not a tax lawyer. I'm a real estate development and finance lawyer, a municipal finance lawyer. So, I come at this from a different perspective than Adam. So, when I first heard about it and I read the original regs and now I've read the latest set of proposed regulations, my question was, well, so what? That's all great. That all sounds wonderful. How do the people who have zones in their cities, how does a city make something happen. So when I'm talking to you, I'm coming from that perspective. And Mike's going to go into a lot of detail about some ideas, some very concrete ideas that cities can do. So I want to give him plenty of time. So what I'm going to do, does everybody or does anybody have this PowerPoint or access to it? Okay, well, we'll make sure that you can get access to it or have it, because there are slides in here that I'm not going to go through because we just frankly don't have time. Usually these presentations are an hour and a half, couple hours to go into all the regulations, but we wanted everybody to have the information, so we went ahead and put it in the PowerPoint. Where's the little? All right, so really what this is talking about is you've got a fund, which is nothing more than a corporation or an LLC that's taxed as a partnership, and it's going to go sell securities to investors, and those investors are going to buy those securities with their capital gains. At that point, the fund has to do something with that money, and it has to do it pretty quick, because the fund has a couple of different testing dates every year when 90% of its assets have to be invested in qualified assets. And if it doesn't, then it's going to have a penalty that its investors will have to pay. So when a fund is looking for projects, they have to look for projects very quickly. So what does that mean? Well, that means that folks like you guys are going to have to figure out a way to sort of be the gatekeeper and cheerleader, if you will, for potential projects that are in your town. And you know where the areas are, you know where the zones are, and within those zones, you know where, wow, there's that vacant building that we really wish somebody would do something with, or would it be great if we had more development in this part of town? So you know where these things are. So what I'm going to do is talk with you about what qualifies as a potential investment by one of these funds. So a fund has the ability to invest in qualified stock, qualified partnership interest, or a qualified business property. So the business in which the fund invests, it's going to sell securities to the fund. It's going to sell a portion of its equity, 20%, 10%, whatever it is, to the fund. So what kind of business qualifies? First, the business has to be a trade or business, which sounds kind of intuitive, but surprisingly, I learned from Adam that the Internal Revenue Code does not define what is a trade or business. So you have to make sure that what the business wants to do is a trade or business. And you can see there in the note that owning and leasing real property is considered the active trade or business. However, a triple net lease is not. I don't know what the policy is behind that. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, but that's what they said. There's been some noise about them kind of changing that, and I hope they do, but that's the rules as of right now. So next, the business can't be a so-called sin business. Some of those are things that you would sort of intuitively guess, no gambling establishments, that kind of thing, but then also look sort of towards the middle of the definition. Hot tub facility? I don't know what a hot tub facility is. We gave this presentation in Hot Springs, and most of downtown Hot Springs is in an opportunity zone, and while those bathhouses would seem like a great project, but are they hot tub facilities? I don't know. There's things that kind of sort of like tubs, and they got hot water in them, but they're not what I think of as a hot tub. So I don't know. Suntan facility? Kind of random, but evidently they don't want to support suntan parlors, I guess. I don't know. So it can't be a sin business. Has to be a trader business, can't be a sin business. Then the bottom on the slide there, those are the harder tests. And I'm going to start from the bottom and work my way up. From a policy perspective, the IRS is trying to encourage active trade and business in low-income areas. So they don't want you to be able to set up a one-room office in an opportunity zone and not really actually do any business. So they limit not what's called non-qualified financial property, the business can only have 5% or less of its tangible assets in non-qualified financial property. What that is things like stocks, bonds, promissory notes. So if you want to open an office in your one room in the Opportunity Zone, and what you're going to do with the money is buy and sell stock on the stock exchange, can't do that because it's non-qualified financial property. Again, they're trying to encourage active businesses. Intangible property test, if the business has intangible property, think of things like copyrights, trademarks, patents, at least 40% of that intangible property has to be used in the active conduct of the trade or business. That means you can't just have a one-room shop that owns a bunch of patents and it licenses those patents, and that's its only business. Because again, trying to encourage actual business. 50% of total income test. This was a hard one when the regs first came out, because at least 50% of the business's total income has to come from the active trade or business in the zone. So let's say you own a grocery store, or the business owns a grocery store. People come from all around outside the zone to shop in the zone, and then they take their groceries and they go home. Is that conduct of a trade or business in the zone? Maybe, maybe not. So the IRS adopted 4 or 5 safe harbors, and what that means, what a safe harbor is if your fact pattern matches the requirements of the safe harbor, then you're deemed to have satisfied whatever test you're trying to satisfy. So there are, I will flip over this slide right there, the bottom, the 4 tests, or 4 safe harbors. So if your employee hours, if at least 50% of your hours are within the zone, then you qualify. Employee wages, at least 50% of your employees or your independent contractors are from services performed within the zone, then you qualify. Revenue, if at least 50% of your gross revenue is generated from tangible property in the zone and the management and operational functions are performed in the zone, then you're good. The bottom was a facts and circumstances, kind of a catch-all kind of thing. You don't really want to try to be in that one. You want to try to be in one of the others. So the business has to have at least 50% of its income. The 70% test is actually the hardest test we found in looking at businesses, because at least 70% of the tangible assets of the business have to meet the requirements of being qualified Opportunity Zone business property. And the hardest part about that is the first requirement is that the property was acquired by the business after December 31st, 2017 from an unrelated person. So you've got a business that's been in existence for a long time and you're trying to have it become a qualified business. It's going to be a little difficult to make sure that at least 70% of its property was acquired after December 31st, 2017. So that's where the wrinkle is that's the hardest for meeting that test. And then there's an original use test or a substantial improvement test that they also have to meet. So those tests are a little bit easier, but the December 31st is a little bit tricky sometimes. So what it requires is, we've got a person we're trying to help become a qualified business or be a qualified business, and he calls these regulations prohibitive. They're not prohibitive, they're just a little complicated. So you have to perhaps think outside the box a little bit. So if you have a supply chain, then maybe you create a new business that runs part of your supply chain, that's buying and selling your inventory. Or if you have a new manufacturing plant that you want to open, but you've been in business for a while, well, let's open that new plant under, using a different corporate entity that's brand new, so that you're meeting the December 31st portion of that. So thoughts like that, creativity like that is what's going to have to be done. And you guys are going to be on the front lines of trying to figure out how to position your city and your zone within your city to best market itself, for lack of a better phrase, to qualified funds. So the qualified funds are out there. I think there's 100 and how many? Like 105 or something that have been formed. We're working with a couple of different ones. And so they're there, and they all have parameters, and they all have types of investments that they're looking for. So the challenge will be, how can the city help its constituents position themselves to receive the investment money? So I've got a little bit more time on my part, but I'm going to sit down and let Mike talk, because I think his portion of this presentation is probably the most helpful for you guys. Lawyers, you find a project and lawyers can help you figure out whether it fits in the box or not. But learning how to position yourself better is not a lawyer thing, it's a Mike thing. And so Mike's going to talk about that now.
Okay, good morning. Do you want your city to grow? Say grow. All right, I know you're awake now. Let's go. We're going to have a little fun. Okay, I can't even read that. Lordy mercy. Okay, so you want to attract the right development. You want it to be the right kind of project for you. You want it to be a good deal. You want it to be positive public relations for your community. You want to have a reputable developer, and you want to win the deal. You know why? Because there are, how many funds are there? 140? 140 funds, multiple areas. There's 65 opportunity zones, 85 opportunity zones in Arkansas. You are in competition. And if you're in competition, do you want to win? Say win. All right. So we're going to talk about the 6 P's. I made this up in 5 minutes. I hope it makes sense, so we'll have some fun with it. Prioritize. Number 1, prioritize. Remember what Rick said yesterday? The basics. And who's going to win? The one that does the basics better, all right? So we're going to talk about the basics. Prioritize your sites. There are 85 zones in Arkansas. You have a big area if you have a zone. Are the developers and investors going to look at your whole zone area? No, you got to figure out which one is going to be best for them. You got to think like a developer. Down at the bottom, a developer is concerned about profit, risk, time, and hassle. In fact, I just thought of something. I'm going to tell you, just so that we're on the same page. First of all, opportunity zones are not your answer for all your problems. They can make a pretty good deal better, but they can't make a bad deal good, okay? So just recognize it's not going to be a cure-all. Commercial developers, they want to make a return on investment, right? What are their considerations? Write this down. You got a pen? Here you go. This is important. Rooftops. That means the number of people within the trade area of that project. Wallets, that means disposable income. Competition, you don't want to go to make a barbershop with another barbershop across the street. Access, which is cars per day or other, how you get to the project. Hassle, developers don't want hassle. It needs to be worked on in advance. And return on investment. If it's not a positive return, market-based, not going to look at it. Opportunity zone minimum project size, probably around $5 million. I'm sorry, if you guys said that, I couldn't hear it because the echo's so bad. There are several federal funding programs that have just been announced that have special consideration in opportunity zones. Your contact person should take a look at that. And if you're looking to attract manufacturing, office, other what I call primary businesses that are not commercial development, whole different perspective. And I could get into that if you'd like, but we will keep going because I'm the last thing between you and lunch. Second P, potential. How are you going to determine what your priorities are if you don't look at the data? That's what a developer does. Look at the market data, look at the competition, look at demand, traffic counts, all those kind of things. So next P, preparation. That means if you have environmental issues, if you have zoning issues, if you have infrastructure issues, try to resolve everything possible. Not that you're going to do 100% of all those issues, but you're going into areas that maybe need redevelopment. So try to minimize the hassle for a developer. Try to get everything coordinated up front before you even put it out on the market. Next P, number 4, price. Local incentives or other benefits. Have that worked out in advance. Don't wait until you've got a deal because you're competing. Remember, you want to win the deal. So you've got infrastructure funding. You've got land issues. If you have multiple owners, try to get a contract for the land purchase so it's fixed. Because once a developer starts looking at a site, guess what? Price goes up, right? Industrial projects, you have various state programs, which this gentleman right here can visit with you about. So try to know what those are based on the use of the site. Try to get it all worked out up front. Next P, person. This is extremely important. You need one person, one key contact person that knows the site, that knows the benefits, that knows generally the processes, opportunity zones, not like these attorneys, because that is, as you've learned for the last 30 minutes, is a very complicated process. But that's why you're going to hire a good attorney to walk a company through that process. But you need someone that knows how to package incentives, package the land, knows what the infrastructure like, knows what the zoning process is, all that stuff. It needs to be one person. Now, you may or may not have that one person available locally. If you work with a regional group, maybe that's your person, Chamber of Commerce or somebody else, but figure out, if you're going to win, remember, say win with me, win. All right, if you want to win, you got to have the right person, knowing the right information, and do it right. The last one is promotion. Once you get all this other stuff done, you need to promote your site. You need to promote your priority site. Why? Because you're in competition, okay? You want a marketing brochure for each of your priority sites. And if it's priority, that doesn't mean 30 sites. That means 3 or 4 sites that you really want to push, and you do a great job on those. You want to research who the potential developers are. Developers have different specialties, and how do you find out? You ask other developers. Who does this kind of project based on our priority projects? You want a database of the right places, in the right places, to promote your priority sites. So, answer the question. Why should a developer or an investor choose your priority sites over the other 85 sites in Arkansas and the hundreds and hundreds throughout the United States? So again, competition. Now if you're thinking, well, how can I do this prospectus? You know, I'm a small community, this is complicated, and it is. There's no question about it. But if you want to try to do it right, get your key contact person or a team to take a look at a few of these. These are just a few. If you Google Opportunity Zone Prospectus, you can find a boatload. Now, you're thinking, these are fairly large communities. I can't, you know, our community doesn't have the capacity or the money or the time to do this. Well, it's like a lot of things in economic development, you steal the best stuff from other people and take credit for yourself, right? Okay? So I think, hey, I'm done. I think we're ready for questions.